If you are one of the many people both interested in and confused by the role of cannabis in cancer treatment, stick around for a very enlightening interview with one of the top cannabis doctors in the country, Dr. Allan Frankel. When our son Ryder was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer 11 days before his first birthday, my wife Teddy and I knew we weren't going to leave anything that could get him well on the table. We've worked with countless doctors and health experts, moved away from our family and friends, raised and spent tens of thousands of dollars, even built a non-toxic house in the middle of the woods, all in the name of healing. Today, Ryder is happy and healthy, and we live more fulfilling lives than before the diagnosis. This is a revolution against what causes cancer and disease, and against what people think about how to reverse it. Whether you are actively healing and want to know all your options, keeping it behind you, or making sure cancer never touches your family, this is your revolution. This is the anti-cancer revolution. From integrative to alternative to energetic, we walk down all paths of wellness, free of bias. My name is Ryan Sternagel. Enjoy the journey. This is an interview I've been looking forward to putting out ever since I recorded it with Dr. Allan Frankel, who is an internal medical doctor and one of the world's leading authorities on dosed cannabis medicine. With over 35 years experience in internal medicine, Dr. Frankel applies his knowledge of all aspects of the cannabis plant and its therapeutic value to the treatment of multiple serious medical conditions. He's presented multiple CME accredited grand rounds lectures on internal medicine and therapies in medical cannabis, and has also participated in roundtable discussions on the topic of future therapies and research for medical cannabis sponsored by the California Medical Association and the Los Angeles County Medical Association. This is an interesting time for cannabis. Even when my son was diagnosed, it was just starting to become legal in some places and still much more underground feeling in terms of available public information on it. There was really just a Rick Simpson documentary and some obscure blogs and research. 5 years later, you can get CBD at the gas station, and the blogosphere is flooded with cannabis articles. But when it comes to the best way to use it in the case of cancer, still a whole lot of gray area for someone attempting to use it therapeutically. That being said, the things Dr. Frankel has to say in this interview make a whole lot of sense, and he provides some pretty clear guidance. Should mention, as always, the information you're about to hear is just that, information, and is of course not intended to replace medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. And with that, I'll let you get to said interview and see you on the other side. Dr. Allan Frankel, thanks so much for coming on the Anti-Cancer Revolution. How are you today?
Thanks for inviting me. I'm good. I'm still waking
Good
up.
is good.
Been on my coffee.
As long as you got your coffee. You know,
Thanks
I
much.
backed off. I backed off recently myself. I just, I don't know, now I sort of look at it as a wasted opportunity to drink tea when you start looking at all the different, it's basically like, well, herbal tea anyway, because then it's like an herbal supplement. Even the black and the green stuff has some good stuff, but yeah, I don't know. That's
Yeah, I don't drink much coffee, but I'll have maybe literally 1 cup every other day.
That's a good way to be. And
I try to spread out my poisons, so I have a broad spectrum poisoning.
Good to hear it. Good to hear it. So I'm excited. I'm excited for this interview. Cancer and cannabis, the two terms have become quite intertwined as of late, and there's a lot of interest around it, which I find exciting. Back many years ago, before I got into the health world or even had a son and that sort of thing, I was interested in cannabis for a different reason, and so now it's cool to see it come full circle and actually have really neat applications and just benefits to society in general, which I'm excited to get to pick your brain on today. Do you want to start off just with the, I guess, general, what led you to become a cannabis doctor? And then I know a good percentage of your patients are cancer patients. Was that intentional from the start or something you kind of morphed into over time?
Well, I trained at UCLA. Actually did my undergraduate medical school internship residency, and then was on the faculty for a number of years. I was a very straight, I remember the last insane conversation I had as a traditional doctor was about aromatherapy, which is now my life. My life is aromatherapy with cannabis, right? And I remember thinking, nah, it has no effects. And that was one of the main areas that I thought I had a lot to learn. So what happened was 20 years ago, I got a chest infection that it just seemed like a bronchial flu type deal, but I kept getting more short of breath. They diagnosed me as being in congestive heart failure from the virus going to my heart and gave me 6 months to live without getting a heart transplant. And I had no interest then, now, ever in getting anything like, I just don't, some people want to get every last minute out of life. I want every minute of my life to be exciting and fun. And if I'm clicking and clanking, I just don't want to be the scarecrow or the tin man. So I said no. I passed on it, had multiple heart biopsies. And then I lived in Topanga, which is a very well-known cannabis site in LA. And my friends had heard I was dying. I was walking like a half a step at a time and taking a break. It was pathetic. But they brought over cannabis products and I got stoned and stayed stoned and loved it. It was great for my mood and depression and the anxiety. But for some reason, after 4 to 5 weeks, I was running up my stairs and I had no idea. Back then, there wasn't much data on THC and heart failure, but now there is. So whether or not it had an active role in saving my life, I don't know, but it certainly got me to studying and reading. And once I realized it was way, way more than what I expected, I'd already sold my practice. So I decided to become a cannabis doctor in 2007.
And then on the cancer front, did that just kind of naturally come with the territory of practicing medicine with cannabis, getting a lot of cancer patients interested in your services?
Yeah, I would say about 1/3 of my patients are cancer patients. So it's a big number, but it's not the majority of the practice. I'm glad it's kind of spread out because you actually learn a lot about taking care of cancer patients with cannabis, by using cannabis for other treatments where you see results more tied to the treatment. But early on it was more using, before lab testing, it was even smoked or edibles for people with chemotherapy. That's where it started. But once labs got open in 2008 and I was able to work with them, and data started coming out as far as the anti-cancer effect, my feeling then and my feeling now is that the dosing there's a lot of people that feel very differently about dosing, but at least in my little world, the dosing that we give people as an anti-proliferative and anti-cancer medicine, we give to them to treat their nausea, chemotherapy symptoms, preventing neuropathy, dealing with pain, sleep. So the numbers of milligrams are pretty close. So a blog I recently wrote was saying it doesn't matter. You don't have to believe that this kills your cancer. The same milligram dose is gonna help you deal with all the other treatments that you receive.
Yeah, I was going through your blog and it was interesting noting that what you said about working with other types of patients, that you're not just seeing cancer patients, you're seeing other patients, but then you can maybe more tangibly see the effect you're looking for in some other kind of condition, whereas cancer, it's kind of a free for all.
Right, and also try figuring out the ballpark. What's a dose or a dosing group of cannabinoids that's not crazy. So there's a lot of different choices out there, and I'm pretty much following the dosing that people are using for clinical trials in Europe and Israel. So it's not high dose, and it's generally maybe 130 milligrams a day between CBD, THC, and the two acid molecules, THCA and CBDA. So I think we're starting to see more and more people using the acid molecules, and there's more and more information that the acid molecules, first of all, they help tremendously with nausea, but they have extremely effective anti-cancer properties.
So can we back up just a minute? I'm really excited to get into dosing with you because I think the question on everyone's mind is how exactly do we use this stuff? But just for folks wrapping their minds around the whole cannabis thing, just a couple entry-level questions to address. Could you maybe just speak to the difference between hemp and cannabis? Just I get asked about that every day. I know it's still something that people have a hard time with.
Well, it's very complicated. I mean, because up until recently, we had industrial hemp, and that's still pretty much the main form of hemp is industrial. And there's not that much CBD in it, and products that come from that, frankly, are far inferior. Cannabis, by definition, at least in the United States, is a cannabis sativa plant that has more than 0.3% THC, period. So it doesn't matter what other cannabis molecules it has in it any longer. It just has to have a low THC. So the problem with the hemp products, at least, and I know a lot of people are going to disagree with this, but whether it's a hemp or it's an isolate or distillate, you're basically saying that the 25 million years of evolution of the cannabis plant to a plant that has an average of 800, 850 molecules between like 120 cannabinoids, 150 terpenes, 100 or so flavonoids, plant waxes, plant lipids. It's got a lot of molecules. I think it's a little bit beyond arrogant to think that we can disregard these 25 million years and pick one molecule and throw everything else away. So I think people are doing the single molecule for all sorts of reasons. I mean, it's clearly more lucrative. So that at the end of the day, that's why they're doing it. But now with, at least in California, where the testing for pesticides is really strict, it's very, 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 even if you don't add any, you can get pesticides coming from adjacent crops. So it's a huge problem. So one of the ways to solve it is to plant actually inside an organic grow that's of blueberries and raspberries, and where nobody in the area is using any pesticides. But the making, once you get that oil, if it's contaminated, if you just strip out CBD or you strip out THC, it's not contaminated. Then it's true that they throw away the rest. So I think that's one of the big reasons that's happening. But now to confuse the hemp thing, there are versions of hemp that were developed from cannabis plants that had maybe a THC of 0.4 or 0.5%, and you just have to lower it to 0.3 to be hemp. It's going to be interesting what happens with that. But regardless, at the end of the day, I'm a big believer in whole plant, where every molecule that's in the oil that you can get into the medicine.
I've come to that conclusion on so many other things. It's vitamin C is the easiest example. There's
versus an orange.
There's ascorbic acid versus what you would get in a acerola cherry or something like that. You got all these different.
To me, it makes I don't know if people really believe it's the same. I mean, it's not that it's completely worthless. It's just that it takes a lot more of it to work, and it never works as well. And if anybody doubts that, I suggest they get 10 milligrams of a hemp CBD from Whole Foods or Erewhon or some health food store, and then
or the gas station.
And get, or the new CBD store, and get 10 milligrams of whole plant CBD and try them on different days. I mean, there's no comparison.
And then when we speak to the therapeutic use of cannabis to try to overcome some ailment, be it chemotherapy side effects or direct anti-cancer mechanisms or so on and so forth, is oil pretty much the only game in town, or do creams or tinctures or salves or all these different things? What do you tend to recommend to folks when they are
Well, here's a salve. This has CBD and THC in it, and you click it and it comes out, and it goes through the skin. We use this for pain. There's another one that has THCV in it that we're using for neuropathy. So to me, when I see a new cancer patient, particularly if they're receiving, for example, chemotherapy that has nerve toxicity, if we give them 30 milligrams or more of whole plant CBD, it prevents the neuropathy, which is huge. THCV, we're using with a lot of the cancer patients because it reverses it. But in ballpark, 30 to 40 milligrams of each of those 4 cannabinoids a day, I think is a good treatment for if somebody's going through chemo, or even if they're not going through chemo, if they're going through radiation, if they're having nausea and vomiting from other causes, or from the tumor itself, or abdominal pain, those 4 cannabinoids, which happen to be, CBD and THC are the 2 major cannabinoids in nature, and their acid forms are the 2 precursors of CBD and THC. So when you look up the effects of these molecules, they work for cancer. They all are effective for cancer. They're all effective for pain. They're all effective for nausea. So to me, if you're using cannabis, you can, if let's say your doctor has a hard time, or you have a hard time believing that this has true anti-cancer properties, I can tell you I'm as close to 100% certain that it does. I'm taking these 4 molecules in the dose I recommend my patients for cancer. I'm taking it every day, like 130 milligrams. Why? I believe it. I don't have to pay much for it, and they drop it off. So, if I didn't take it, I think my patients would really have to question my sincerity. But it's not just, I hope it's helping prevent cancer. So far I don't have cancer, but it helps me if I have indigestion. It's much more limited. It helps my anxiety. It helps my knee pain, my back pain. So in learning, like for dosing, getting back to the dosing, again, I feel pretty comfortable at this point with 30 to 40 milligrams of each of the 4, but that's going to change. To me, any cannabinoid or terpene or flavonoid that's been proven to kill cancer cells, we should include in the regimen. And one of the issues I have with the Rick Simpson is that it's never changed. It's always been a gram a day of THC, which personally I think is much too much.
And when you say a gram, just to really spell that out for folks, you're talking about 30 or 40 milligrams of THC, and then another 30 or 40 of CBD, THCA, THCV.
No.
But
when I'm talking about a gram and the Rick Simpson.
Well, yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. Contrast that to a gram is 1,000 milligrams.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's actually about 750 milligrams. And if you ever read like a gram syringe for CBD or THC, it'll tell you about 75%. And one question that very few people ask is, why isn't a gram 1,000 milligrams? But it's a gram of THC oil or a gram of CBD oil, like a 20 to 1, a 30 to 1, will have about 70-75% of the active molecule. And the other 25-30% are cannabinoids, terpenes, flavonoids, waxes, lipids that we can't test. But it's all important. It's hard for me to say that 30% is junk. So when people go and make a CBD, THC, cannabinoid extract, and they say, well, it's pure, it's 99.9% CBD. I say, take it away. 13 years ago, I left the world of pharma. And now I'm back in cannabis, and people are talking about pure. And pure is a wonderful word if you're talking about free from contamination. But pure is not a wonderful word when you talk about pure CBD, pure THC. So I think this is something that I don't know what's going to happen to the cannabis world, but right now it's going more and more to isolates and distillates.
Yeah,
I'm not happy. We're going the opposite way. We're going to antique hashing techniques.
Well, and I know a lot of that's being pushed. Well, some of it is being pushed by legality. For instance, here in Utah, they passed a very watered down medical cannabis bill last year that got even more watered down once it went through, and it's basically still inaccessible for the average patient to obtain a full plant extract of cannabis, but they've got around it with the CBD only hemp derived thing, and now you see it popping up in the coffee shops and the Whole Foods and all that stuff. So I mean, I know that's one reason for it, which again, you get into, not to make this a government show, but when the government starts picking winners and losers, then that's what happens.
Hey, any show about cannabis is a government show.
There you go.
It is. I mean, I saw a video the other day. I was reading about old Fords, the original Fords, and the original Fords, some of the fenders were made out of hemp, and they had an image of a video. It was a video of a guy taking a sledgehammer and trying to break the hemp fender.
No way.
Wouldn't break, wouldn't scratch. It was so they obviously decided they can't have that. Get rid of that and go to steel. But our cars could have all been made out of hemp.
Wow. Well, I knew it had a lot of industrial applications. I did not know you could make a car out of it as well. That's incredible. Back to the dosing. When you say that if you get say for instance, you get a gram of 1,000 milligrams of the oil, but then only 75% of that 750 milligrams is THC. When you're recommending, say you're recommending 40 milligrams of each component, the CBD, THC, so on and so forth. Would that be 40 milligrams of THC plus the additional 25% of cannabinoids, various cannabinoids in there, or would it be, 40% of the oil as in 40 milligrams of the total oil less that 25%?
Less that 25%, because we don't even know what to label that. But what you're talking about brings up actually a really valuable point, particularly for patients who live in states that don't have a lot of products. What you can often get is, like you're referring to, THC oil in a syringe, a 1 gram syringe, and CBD, whole plant oil in a syringe. And maybe I can send you this recipe written down, but let me just, it's just such a simple thing. So let's say it's 750 or 75% CBD, and now you want to take 20 milligrams a day. How do you take 20 milligrams out of 750 and have it be the same all the time? And how do you take that thick oil? Well, what you do is what the Chinese have been doing for 3,500 years. This is not new. With thick plant oils, you can't dose them that way. So what do? Is you mix them with thin plant oils like MCT oil or coconut oil or olive oil. So the formula is very simple. I think getting your tincture to 20 milligrams per dropper, 20 milligrams per milliliter, whether it's CBD, THC, or the acids. So if it's 750 milligrams, you divide it by 20, and that tells you how many milliliters of olive oil to dissolve that gram in, and you'll have it at 20 milligrams per milliliter. And then you can take a half a milliliter 3 times a day for the CBD, a half a milliliter 3 times a day for THC. And this is, I mean, very few people in California do this, although more and more, if there are patients who can find those oils, and we'll help them. And if a lot of people with cancer are broke. I mean, they're really struggling. And the cost of cannabis medicines is ridiculous. I mean, it's way too high. But if you get those oils in syringes, and you can even get THC acid as shatter, so you could get 3 of the 4 and make it at home, and it's a quarter the price. And it's very simple. If you're doing it with shatter and acid, that'll be like 80% or something, maybe 90%. 900 milligrams divided by 20 is how much olive oil to use, and you'll have it at 20 mg per ml all the time. And usually I recommend olive oil, and I'm spending a few minutes on this because this formula, I mean, it's not very much of a complex formula, but it's the way everybody dissolves tinctures. We all do it that way. It's arithmetic. So people that can get the thick oils can now have dose medicine.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, I had started to work out the same process, just kind of intuitively for myself back when we were living in Washington State, right after my son was diagnosed, and I was coming to about the same conclusion that you just described there, if memory serves. But then we moved here to Utah, and we already were in troublesome waters with parental choice and
But
all that
I
good
see a
stuff.
lot of patients from Utah. I see the most patients from that's not a legal state, from Texas. Tons of patients from Texas. I'll tell you, Texans get what they want, and they want, at least the ones I'm seeing, and I think they're going to be a big, big medical cannabis state.
It seems only a matter of time for most states.
But we need doctors. We desperately, that's my real concern. I mean, if you ask me what's my biggest worry about all this, it's not the feds. The feds are going to change. They're going to deregulate. And a big part of the reason they are going to, at least I believe that, is the pharmaceutical companies want deregulation so they can make better quality medicine. They don't love the fact that their stuff is much poor quality than what you and I could make up in an afternoon.
Yeah, very true. But you're saying the doctors, you just want to see more doctors actually competent with using the stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, every month or two, I'll have a doctor that'll come here for a week. I love it. The patients love it. The doctors really enjoy it. But it takes, what I really would love to do is have Greenbridge move into one of the UCs or other universities and have a residency program where they could rotate a month or two and really learn about medical cannabis.
Could you speak to the endocannabinoid system and let folks know what that's about? And my question that I've always had pertaining to that is, if we have this internal cannabinoid system, and it seems we have receptors on our cells, and I'll let you fill in the gaps a little more there, but set disease aside for a second, therapeutic purposes, are we supposed to be do we have a nutritional deficiency of cannabinoids if we're not taking them on a regular basis, given the fact that there are these receptors on our cells? So yeah, I'll let you take it from there.
The endocannabinoid system was first developed about 1.2 billion years ago in any animal that had a spine of any kind. So certainly all the mammals we have, dogs, cats, pets, lizards, I mean, pretty much everything has an endocannabinoid system. The phytocannabinoids, or the cannabinoids from the plant, started supposedly 25 million years ago. But whether it was 25 million years ago or 100,000 years ago, it's way, way after the endocannabinoid system developed in nature. And the plants, I mean, I don't know, I mean, the plants were not around when the endocannabinoid system was developed, but the cannabinoid functions. I mean, in the plants, it's dealing with the leaf senescence and control of bugs, but with us, it's controlling mood, it's controlling, I think, the mind-body connection. And there is no question that just like every other neuro element, we can have deficiencies of them. And most of the time, like with SSRI antidepressants, you give the patient SSRI, it pumps, it changes the way the reuptake of serotonin happens, and it allows us to become dependent upon it. With the endocannabinoid system, when we take in, whether it's the neutral molecules or the acid molecules in particular have a lot of activity against the endocannabinoid system and pump up the level of these endocannabinoids. It's absolutely related to disease. It's now possible, I mean, it would not be easy for me to do this right now, but it is possible if you have the right laboratory where you can measure, you could get baseline CBD, THC levels, metabolic breakdown levels, and measures of endocannabinoids like anandamide and 2-AG, give somebody CBD, and then measure what happens to their CBD level, their hydroxy CBD, and their endocannabinoids. So there's going to be a point, if we can get our hands on, so if there's any really rich people out there that want to help the system, we need a really good lab machine, not for plants, but for people. And also with cannabis, absorption is an issue. So, I mean, it's not directly related to the endocannabinoid question, but when somebody doesn't have a good response to a cannabis product that I think they should, is it because they didn't get it absorbed or wasn't enough? That's a really basic question. What about for seizures? Is there serum levels? But the endocannabinoid system in relationship to cancer is really interesting in that anandamide, which is kind of our internal THC, is one of our major monitors for controlling cancer. So when we take in cannabinoids, they work in a lot of different ways in treating cancer, but one of the major ways is by pumping up our endocannabinoid system, which then becomes like a surveyor of cancer cells and leads to apoptosis, cellular suicide, autophagy, self-digestion of cancer cells. It's a powerful system. And with the most common form of endocannabinoid deficiency, and I see this not every day, but probably every 2 days, would be a very typical patient would be, there's more women with it than men, at least that I'm seeing, but they'll have migraines, they'll have irritable bowel, they'll have anxiety, and early morning disrupted sleep. All of them have this, and usually fibromyalgia. So when somebody comes in and says they have fibro, now I'm asking, do you have migraines? Do you have irritable bowel? And if they have that complex of symptoms, and they're usually on like 6 different pharmaceutical medications for each one of those issues, but from a cannabis perspective, it's endocannabinoid deficiency. We don't have enough cannabinoids circulating. And that's why trying, like in general, for the endocannabinoid deficiency syndrome, and I'm not saying that I have any good data on this, but since the acid molecules are so effective in pumping up the endocannabinoid system, I give them a combination of CBD and THCA. And the results have been amazing. And then you get these people off their 5 medications. And the biggest, there's so many problems with the pharmaceutical world, but the issues are, and everybody's worried about the addiction potential of cannabis, which is close to 0. I mean, the federal government has studied that, and it's like 3 or 4% for THC. And it's probably not even real.
Just to hammer what you said in there about phytocannabinoids, what you would eat or ingest and consume in some way, versus your endocannabinoid system, and the phytocannabinoids actually activating your endocannabinoid system. Are you saying then that without ingesting the external source of cannabinoids, that your endocannabinoid system, for the purposes of cancer surveillance system, or cancer surveillance purposes, it's more or less asleep on the job without?
Well, this is the question of the day. You honed in on it immediately. The way we're going to need to study that. Clearly, people can live pretty good lives without cannabis, because most people have lived very good lives without cannabis. But most people live better lives with cannabis. And to know, maybe there's different degrees of endocannabinoid deficiency. It's we have a lot to learn about it, but it's the fact it was discovered in 1985, and now it's almost 2020 or 2020. It's still not being taught in any medical schools. So doctors in school now have no idea about this. 2 of my children are doctors, and I taught them about it, but they never learned about it. I mean, it's pretty weird that they're not teaching this in school.
Yeah, weird until you start thinking about why they would not be teaching it.
Then it's obvious, yeah.
This question is going to be I know every case is different, and there are no 2 similar cancer patients and all that, but just given the fact that you've seen so many cancer patients, and especially with what your practice is, I'm guessing you kind of see all comers, between people going through chemotherapy and wanting to use cannabis. I'm sure you see a lot of folks that, and we're talking about cancer in specific, folks that I see a lot of people that just want to use cannabis, and that's it. That's their sole plan is to use cannabis. And then I see a lot of people not using chemotherapy, but using cannabis, and also using a whole lot of other alternative, holistic, whatever you want to call it, means.
But I also see a lot of patients, I would say it's more my more average patient. This is because of my referral base are doctors for the, I mean, and patients, but doctors refer me a lot of patients.
Yeah.
So the majority, my average cancer patient is on chemo and cannabis. So traditional and nouveau. Now, I see a lot of people that, you know, want to pass on chemo. And for the most part, ultimately it's the patient's decision. But there have been times when patients didn't want to use chemo, where the chemo was like a 95% cure, and they just want to use cannabis. I wouldn't do it. And I remember one young male with testicular cancer, and he said, I just want to deal with this with, you know, with cannabis. And I said, I'm not going to be involved with that. And they told me there's a 95% cure rate with traditional treatment. I mean, we might not, you know, love some of the cyclists, but they were definitely doing it. And
yeah, I'm always.
So, I mean, if you ask the question, what's my ballpark, because this comes up every day. If we don't do any chemo or radiation, what do you think the ballpark of me doing well? And I think the ballpark is around two out of three. But I think it depends. We need to be able to do better testing to find out, and maybe using lower chemo doses. But now we're able to use chemo doses and prevent the toxicity with cannabis. So I just wrote a blog on people revisiting chemo. I mean, I'm not one of the doctors that's like, no, you should never do this. It's terrible. I mean, do I think that chemo and radiation in 50 years from now will be standards? Probably not. I hope not. But it's not all a waste. I think you have to really, if a doctor can show the patient good studies that show better than a 50% response rate, I mean, it's pretty hard for me to say no to that, especially when we can make them feel pretty well going through the chemo.
That's an interesting ballpark, the 2/3, by the way. And that would be, you're saying people, because my thing is, yeah, I was reading your blog, and you made when you were talking about the cannabinoids and how there's all these different cannabinoids, and why would you want to just settle for one? And you wrote that if chemotherapy wasn't as toxic as it was,
you use 10
you probably want to do all the chemos.
Right? I mean, kind of there's a logic there, at least.
Yeah, and that's same for me with just how I view holistic, alternative, whatever you want to call it, treatments. Is why would you just do one thing? Why wouldn't you be doing 100 different things? Because they are non-toxic. I like to drill down on the concept of a a soul therapy versus a complementary therapy, and
do anything that doesn't seem crazy.
There you go.
And maybe a couple crazy things.
Throw a couple of those in there for sure. And then you've hinted at it a couple times here, but I was not necessarily aware that cannabis could actually prevent. I hear a lot about mitigating short-term side effects, of course, but then when we talk about preventing long-term side effects, usually what gets talked about more often than not is just detoxification. But you're saying that
neuropathy
can actually prevent long-term side effects from chemotherapy.
I have multiple oncologists that now send me all their patients who are getting neurotoxic chemo. And knock on wood, we have not had a single case of neuropathy. Now, I've also seen cases of terrible neuropathy that we're able to, I think, reverse most of the time with THCV. So yeah, I mean, it's, look, CBD is protective of kidneys, it's protective of the brain. Why not, if you're giving toxic stuff, it makes sense to give protective stuff. So. And
you're saying, just to make it clear, you're saying THCV is in Victor there, right? I think that's what a lot of people may not have heard of THCV. I've only become recently aware of it myself. Can you elaborate? I mean, is that available everywhere, or is it more in just the California and some of the other more liberal states? Just yeah,
It's like, no, as far as I know, it's only available to people in California. I don't know
really?
of any strains, but it's like CBD. It's going to explode, and THCV is going to be used for a number of illnesses. I mean, it's the only cannabinoid that I know that really raises your mood. I mean, it treats depression. So that's one of the reasons. Then when you mix it with THC, it's great for migraines. It's great for a lot of different pain syndromes. Supposedly, not based upon my experience, but based upon some animal studies, it relieves the symptoms and stops progression of Parkinson's. That's going to be one of the biggest things to study as we get more of it that we can give it to patients. But it's a big deal. It's a really big deal. It's very exciting. And the feeling of it, of a THCV tincture, I mean, I'm not supposed to use the word euphoria, but you just get happy with focus. I mean, that's not a bad thing.
And when you're dosing for, that's very, I'm going to have to look further into THCV. When you're dosing for integrative purposes, side effect prevention or side effect mitigation, short-term side effect mitigation, is it the same 30, 40 milligrams you're talking about with the therapeutic side? Is it pretty much the same, or do you look at those doses differently?
I haven't found something to work better than those four combined at that level for symptoms of chemo and radiation and burns and GI, appetite, vomiting, insomnia, agitation. It seems to be a really good combination. And I think why did I pick it? Well, I mean, initially we were into CBD and THC, and it was only about 4 years ago. I mean, William Courtney, I got to hand it to him. He was definitely ahead of the rest of us in realizing the potential of, the raw forms. And I mean, I'm in love with the raw forms of THCA and CBD. CBDA, of all those molecules, might be the best to treat nausea. THCA and CBD treat bladder spasms and urgency. I mean, so who would know? I mean, who would have possibly known that? But if you happen to be in a medical position where all these victims are coming through, we've got all these tinctures to try. Over the years, you try pretty much everything until you find stuff that works. I mean, THCA turns out, and now there's articles to prove this, works through repairing our mitochondria, our energy producing organelles. That's a big deal. There's a ton of diseases that are mitochondrial deficient. And now usually give them CBD and THCA, and we see dramatic improvements. Myasthenia gravis, a neuromuscular weakness disorder, probably 60 to 70% of those people get off a bunch of their drugs with CBD and THCA, and sometimes with a little THC. So, I mean, these are not things that were thought of, just, we're going to use cannabis for myasthenia gravis. It was somebody came in and we thought, but why not? Let's try this. But the THCA was the real secret, not anything else.
And then when we talk about the entourage effect, the whole plant benefit versus just these isolates, for most of this discussion, we've been talking about THC, CBD, THCA, CBDA, but then like you mentioned, there's all these different hundreds of terpenes and flavonoids and waxes and all this stuff. Is that where from strain to strain, is that where you'd be seeing the biggest variation and all those other X factors? And if so,
that's really what defines strains.
Yeah, and then how much of that do you take into account when you're prescribing something for anti-cancer purposes or integrative purposes or whatever? I mean, is there a way to really tell what's,
I don't think we're smart enough yet. I mean, there are people out there who believe they're able to do it by strains. They either know more than I do or they're making it up. I don't know. But is that important? Yeah, it's really important. And when we're able to do better extractions and better lab testing, we'll be able to get those answers.
Yeah, it certainly seems like something that could be optimized for sure, but it also seems
So
like,
much could be optimized. I mean, the fact, like I was saying earlier, that I don't know the level in my patient's blood of the medicine is a real issue. That's an issue. I've never been in that situation. I mean, just figure it's cannabis. It's so safe, it doesn't matter. But it does matter. These people are sick. They're sick people coming in.
yeah, and that's the rub, it would be really great to know, but then I also, my marketing alert kind of goes on high when I hear people saying this strain is best for this type of cancer and so on and so forth.
If they know that, I mean, all I can say is I don't.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And then speaking of just popular culture, I mean, and you've already kind of spoken to it, but most people are familiar with RSO, the Rick Simpson oil. And I read on your blog that you're pointing out that maybe it got all this attention because it's the best, because it made the biggest wave in really bringing this to the masses. But is it the best? And then that gets back to just to fill folks in. That's more of the higher dose, 1,000 milligrams, 750, that sort of thing. You also wrote on there that, and I've seen this myself too, that you've seen patients with that come into you perhaps taking that high dose, and then they do have an initial response, the stage 4 metastatic patients, all that sort of thing, and then they have a response, it's looking good, but then all of a sudden it comes back. Whereas when you dose them with the lower dose, it doesn't come back as much. Could you elaborate on that and just kind of, I don't know, because I've seen the same thing with it coming back with people using cannabis as one of their sole therapies, but then this note of what you're saying, that the lower dose keeps it way better. That's fascinating.
Well, I think there are some people that I think clearly go on to do very well with the Rick Simpson. But for a lot of people, cannabis is a bimodal drug. It can have opposite effects at low dose and high dose. And when you're taking a gram of oil a day of THC, that's extremely high dose. So there are going to be some tumors that are not going to do well with that. Now, you can imagine when patients come in that have been taking 700-800 milligrams of THC a day, and now they're taking much less. They go along with it because they're not doing well. If they were doing great, they would. And then there's all these people in the middle that will take like one piece of rice, the way that RSO is dosed, or 2 pieces of rice size, and they just leave it that. And those patients I'm worried about. I'd rather have them take the whole RSO or think about a more balanced program. It just doesn't make sense to me that we should have to use a plant at a dose that makes people violently ill. It just rubs me the wrong way. And this gram figured out 8 years ago, and Rick had skin cancer. I mean, any skin cancer will be treated with any oil successfully. But yeah.
Yeah, no, it's
balanced oils.
Stuff, and like you said, there's still so much to be uncovered. But I mean, certainly if a lower dose was the best, which you're not the only one who I've who I've heard making that statement. I mean, it'd certainly be a lot easier on people's wallets and their bank accounts. That's for sure. And then there's, I mean, there is such a thing as, I don't know if toxicity is the right word, but
it has toxicity. I mean, if you're throwing up and you can't stand, those are side effects of toxic. I mean, am I going to make a statement that people should never use RSO? No. I mean, we have so much more to learn. And there is, a year ago, there was a clinical trial on a certain type of brain tumor, astrocytomas, which are similar to glioblastomas. And there they were using 30 milligrams a day of CBD and 30 milligrams a day of THC. And they had to bust the study at stage 3 because the cannabis group was doing so much better. And they put them on now lifelong cannabis. This was done by a pharmaceutical company, done by GW with Sativex. I mean, whole plant, 1-to-1 CBD, 30 milligrams a day. So, and it was a very solid study. I mean, the referrals that I'm getting for glioblastomas have really gone up since that study came out.
Wow. That's very encouraging. Do children come much into the practice? And if so, do you, I don't know if it's a taboo thing to talk about with cannabis being legal there or not, but yeah, I mean,
No.
what considerations do you make and how you might
Let me tell you,
them differently?
it's not taboo at all when it comes, at least from my perspective.
Well, yeah, sure.
I mean, when you see these kids, whether they're autistic kids or seizure kids on 3 meds, autistic kids on antipsychotics, you see ADHD kids on amphetamines and benzos, and people express, well, you're giving them cannabis. I think, yeah, thank God. I mean, is there any chance that an addicting antipsychotic would be better for a 3-year-old? So I actually recently looked at my numbers. I've seen about 500 seizure kids, about 500 autistic kids, and about 100 kids that came in more specifically with ADD and anxiety. Overall, I mean, they wouldn't keep coming back if they weren't doing better. And it's hard not to beat the treatment they've been getting before because they're so messed up. I mean, the antipsychotics, they blow up. I mean, what are we doing? I mean, we're giving antipsychotics to 3-year-olds and we're giving speed to people with ADD and anxiety. And there was a patient mother came in with a kid, 3-year-old. He has tics, he has seizures, and he has ADHD. So the brilliant treatment was to give him a form of Ritalin. It wasn't Ritalin. So he started seizing more. I mean, everything just went down the drain. The fact that we give speed to children, that bothers me a lot. That really bothers me. Giving CBD to children, hey, yeah. we make it ourselves, you know? We make all these cannabinoids and hundreds more. It's very hard to believe these are toxic.
Well, yeah, just, you know, the fact that my world is cancer, but more specifically, you know, childhood cancer. That's why I got into this with my son, and that's where we're following a whole lot of parents out there, and just same thing, you know, the fact that they would only be given chemotherapy, and many parents discouraged from even looking into this as a potential therapy for their children is, yeah, well, it's upsetting to say the least.
And it's changing fast.
Yeah. Any general ballpark, you know, how differently would you dose a child than an adult? Do you do a percentage of body weight type thing, or?
You know, I see that like Epidiolex is dosed by the kilogram. I have not yet seen a study or a patient where dosing by the kilogram made any sense. And I have some of my smallest patients on the largest doses and some of the largest people on the smallest doses. I don't think it's weight-based. And even the people who say, yes, it should be 5 milligrams per kilogram or 20 milligrams per kilogram, they don't start there. They start lower and see how it goes. So what is really the weight?
Are you making that statement for all compounds, like the different herbal supplements and whatnot, or is that your stand on everything, or just for cannabis?
Cannabis. Okay. I mean, the supplements. I tell my patients I have a really hard time knowing what supplements to recommend and what brands to recommend since there's no testing.
Yeah.
I mean, they got away with that.
And that said, are there any potential complications you're aware of with interactions with different compounds at all when it comes to cannabis, be it a pharmaceutical medicine or a herbal supplement, or, you know, something in between?
Well, if the medicine, let's talk about cannabis and pharmaceuticals, because that's the most common place it comes up.
Yeah.
It depends upon the dosing of cannabis. It depends upon the type of cannabis, and depends how the cannabis is taken. So if the cannabis is taken, you're likely to have the biggest issue if it's oral, with an oral pill that are both going through the liver for metabolism, because there's competition there. But it totally depends upon the dose of CBD and THC. And when it's whole plant, it's very different than isolate. I saw my first serious drug interaction 2 weeks ago in somebody that was on a stable dose of their psych meds and then got hemp-based CBD and took 200 milligrams. But if you're taking 200 milligrams of hemp-based isolate, which is simple to do because you don't feel very much with 10 or 20, there are going to be drug interactions that are going to be problems. Also, when you're doing whole plant medicine, the dose that you give people is rarely over 20, 30 milligrams max per dose. And there's never been any P450 enzyme drug interactions at that dose. So that's, I mean, my biggest concern about the isolates is that we're going to start seeing more drug interactions.
Very interesting. It makes a lot of sense. That's all the, you know, the big questions I wanted to ask you. Is there anything I didn't ask pertaining to cannabis and cancer you'd want to get out there to the world?
I personally feel it's incredibly effective, and even if it's not killing your cancer, it's one new study, for example, just came out and showed that CBD can prevent tolerance from developing for the tumors for the chemotherapy agent. You know, you're taking a chemotherapy agent and it becomes resistant, it no longer kills the tumor. CBD prevents that. So that's one other place, one other reason to combine them. I think everybody with cancer should be using cannabis. I mean, I absolutely feel that way.
Hard to argue after that interview. Dr. Allan Frankel, this has been great. Do you want to let everyone know where to find all things Dr. Allan Frankel? Anything in particular you want to point them to?
To find anything Allan based, you can just type in Allan Frankel into your URL. But I'm at greenbridgemed.com, and my office phone number is 310-393-0640. Greenbridge Med.
Do you do remote consultations for folks out of state?
That's about half of what we do. And we do it either Zoom or phone, depending which the patient prefers.
Very good to know.
And then we sign them up for our messaging pattern and messaging programs, because people message me once or twice a week. And that's how we actually learned everything, by getting all this massive input saying, no, it's not working. It's not. I mean, then you have to face the fact that you might have thought you had the right idea, but you didn't. So yeah, so once a patient signs up for messaging and we've done like an hour video, I can't even remember really whether they live in LA or they live back east. So
that's great. Very good to know.
Having the time of my life.
Well, we keep a list of practitioners that work with people remotely, mostly cancer doctors, naturopathic oncologists, and that sort of thing. But yeah, we keep that list on our website. We don't have any cannabis practitioners on there, so I'll throw you up on the site.
Well, thank you so much. It was fun.
Yeah, this has been great, Dr. Allan Frankel. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks. I like your barn again.
For people just listening, I green screened the image of the historic, iconic white barn in Park City, Utah. So there you go.
It's awesome. You were great. I really had a good time.
There you go. The guy makes a lot of sense, doesn't he? Now, like he said, no one's got all the answers, but I think for something like this in particular, experience is going to be your best guide as far as what works and the best way to approach it. You can certainly tell Dr. Frankel has been at this a very long time and cares a whole lot about his craft. And while I'd be the last to say I've got cannabis all figured out, at this time at least, especially after this interview, I'm definitely a big fan of the lower dose strategy. I've had several people now tell me they've seen a whole lot of other people get incredible initial results with cannabis only to get recurrences later. So Dr. Frankel saying he's been able in a lot of cases to get it back under control with a lower dose is highly interesting. Not saying, of course, that the high dose approach has never worked for anyone, because clearly it has, but this would certainly be a whole lot cheaper way to start. Not to mention, you'd be able to still function and go about your other healing activities in a timely manner, which doesn't hurt either. Anyway, this certainly won't be the last cannabis-related interview, as it is such a hotly debated topic, but I think everyone can agree there's a whole lot of value in the stuff, and it's definitely worth strong consideration no matter what your situation is. That's all for me this week. I am Ryan Sternagel of the Stern Method, and if you are going through cancer, just keep going.